Hi, it's Laura at Aquamarine18. Thanks for stopping by my channel today. Welcome or welcome back. This is my November 2021 recap video where I talk about decks I've been enjoying, books I've read this month, some animal learning, and other miscellaneous life updates. I will start with the random updates. I cannot believe that it is December 1st. Normally I film these recaps on, the last day of the month or thereabouts, but I didn't really fully internalize that there was no November 31st until it was November 30th, which was yesterday. So here I am. It's been an extremely busy month for me. The semester is wrapping up, which means I am just about to receive about 100 term papers. That'll be next week. And just when those are finished, I will have 100 exams. I am also, of course, working on planning for next semester and have deadlines around submitting course plans and things like that. So very busy work-wise. I also wanted to thank folks who had reached out to me after I had mentioned in a prior video that Daryl, one of the cats, was not doing so well. I appreciate the well wishes that folks sent to me. He was initially diagnosed with pancreatitis. It later, after several weeks of treatment for pancreatitis, became clear that that was not everything that was going on. So there was a few more trips to the vet, and he has been diagnosed with triaditis. Triaditis is a trio of issues: pancreatitis, gallbladder issues or gallstones, and irritable bowel syndrome. So there's a lot going on for Daryl health-wise. There are potentially some other issues as well, but they're not needing immediate attention in the way that the triaditis issues are. So he is on medication. He is on the mend. He's eating well again. I'm grateful that it is something that is manageable. From what I've learned about this, it is now going to be, a case of trying to make sure that he has a diet that is not going to irritate his digestive tract and to try to prevent flare-ups of all of these issues going forward. So he's going to be on medication for quite a while, like 8 weeks minimum from around now. But he is doing much better. He's probably a little bit embarrassed. They did have to shave him. Most of his abdomen and up the sides of his midsection. So he's probably feeling a little bit more naked than usual, but he is on the mend. So thank you for folks who asked how he was doing, or, who sent get well soon wishes for Daryl. He is doing a little bit better now. Of course, it's not the best having to kind of deal with administering liquid medication that tastes terrible multiple times a day, but it is helping him, and it's helping him noticeably. So I'm happy about that. Other than that going on in November, I've of course been doing some thinking around things like New Year's resolutions and setting up my day planner for 2022, and if I'm going to have any New Year kind of learning goals or anything akin to kind of depth year focuses, things like that. So I'll be sharing those things in the coming month as they come together. I will be getting to see family for a little bit of time this month, I'm hoping, and we'll get a little bit of time off as well, so I'm looking forward to that. I'm also looking forward to doing some tarot tags this month. I have a little bit of a backlog of a few tags that I would like to do VRs to that, have been circulating for a little while now, but I do still plan to contribute. So that is something to look for in December. In terms of decks I've worked with the most or received this month, I have been working with, again, my Afro Tarot 2, which is by Jessie Jumanji. And so this deck has been a deck that I've been working with for daily draws. I'm thinking that for the new year, I will be aspiring to a more consistent daily practice, a daily draw being part of it. I've been kind of working on what would be the ideal daily practice for me over the last couple of months and trying to really kind of consolidate that into something that is simultaneously manageable and does what I want it to do. And so I've been doing daily draws and I've been using this deck and it's been great. This deck has been really great for looking at things like, word of the year and visioning as well. It's been a great deck to work with. So I've been pretty much only working with Afro Tarot 2 this month. I have gotten out a couple of other decks for larger readings when I've been doing readings around kind of moon phases and things like that. But for everyday usage this month, it has been the Afro Tarot 2 by Jessie Jumanji. It is a great deck. And I will say that this very shiny gilding that's almost sparkly, that I've never had a deck that has a gilding quite like this before, has held up so well to my not very gentle overhand shuffling with the edges of the cards always, hitting against each other. So I'm very, very happy about that because I really like this deck so much. So this has been a great deck to work with. I also received one deck this month, and I'm still kind of freaking out about this a little bit. I received the deck that was on my wish list this month, the Slow Hauler Tarot. So I'm excited. I got the book as well, which is a nice thick book that is the size of the cards, or roughly the size of the cards anyway. I have the deck in order right now because I've really just been looking through it and appreciating it and learning it and looking at the book. And this has been a deck that's been on my wish list for ages. I had kind of consigned myself to the idea that I wouldn't be getting it because, some of the prices that it has gone for on eBay and things like that are just like not in the realm of possibility for me, or not, something that I would do. But it has come to me, and I'm extremely, extremely, extremely grateful and appreciative that it has. It is just magical, and I am overjoyed. So that's the one deck I received this month. I'm very, very excited to have the Slow Hauler Tarot, which has been out of print for quite some time, and it's just a wonderful, wonderful deck. So I'm really, really excited about that. Books I've read this month, books I've finished this month. I finished 7 books. And before I get to the 7 books, I will also say that as of this month, as of last night, I have officially read 100 books this year. I write down all the books that I've read in my planner for each month. And so it's not that I'm like counting per se, but I do have a numbered list, so I know. And I also review books online on Goodreads and Storygraph, and they also keep track of different reading statistics for you. So I've read 100 books. I thought that was pretty exciting. On Goodreads every year, it asks you to kind of set a goal for reading for the year, and I picked 100 books, just kind of, it felt like a round number, with no real aspirations at all necessarily. But I had read 99 books last year, so I had picked 100 for this year, and I've hit that, and I have a month left. So that was a little exciting thing. I do plan on doing a video, a reading recap towards the end of December, talking about some of my favorite new authors that I found this year, and why I really like their work, some of my favorite books in a couple of different genres that I've read this month, and also some statistics around my reading, the kinds of books I've read, and checking in with my aspirations to be reading very diversely, things like this. So I will make a video about reading kind of overview, but I do have some books to share with you. Half of them were Kindle, but I have some hard copies. So I read the Ontario Nature Guide by Krista Kagume. I'm going to say Kagume. And this is a guide of animals, plants, and trees in Ontario. This is part of my reading for my candidate studies as a Druid in the AODA, where one of the things that we do in the first year is learn about the ecology of the environment that we live in. And so it's a bit weird to be reading like field guides cover to cover, honestly, but I'm learning lots of little facts about animals that I have seen frequently and not known much about. And it's been really great to observe things that I've read out in the world. So I enjoyed this book. It's maybe not the best as a field guide in some ways in terms of how it's organized. But in terms of a kind of book of interesting facts about animals in Ontario, I really liked it for that. I read the short novel Olivia by Dorothy Strachey, and Olivia is a older novel now. The author was a member of the Bloomsbury Group, and we read this book in the Diverse Classics Book Club, which is hosted by Seji of the Artisan Geek, associated with the Artisan Geek Patreon. So I'll link to that below. And Olivia is this, again, very short novella, really, following a young schoolgirl who goes to a boarding school and develops a fascination with, obsession with one of her teachers, a female teacher. And this book inspired the novel and film Call Me By Your Name, if you've read or seen either of those. I actually haven't. But Olivia was really interesting. It was written as a kind of diary of this young girl accounting her feelings in this situation, coming to find herself very attracted to this teacher. And what I thought that the author did really well was capture a kind of adolescent stream of consciousness, kind of thinking and feelings. I thought that was really, really effectively done. It's not an exciting book plot-wise. It's really a character development kind of book, and I read it in a very short amount of time. And I'm looking forward to discussing it with the group on the weekend. So that was good. I also just finished yesterday a novel called Wildwood Whispers by Willa Reese. And in Wildwood Whispers, the main character is a young woman who's grown up in foster care, and her best friend passes away very early in the book, so it's not much of a spoiler. I think it's like on the book jacket that happens. And she had agreed to take the ashes of her friend back to this tiny Appalachian town where the friend had grown up. And so she goes there and she finds that she feels and has a connection to the Appalachian region and the forests and the people there. And it's very much a fantastical, almost kind of magical realist book with a lot of aspects of folk magic in it. And so I would say that the main kind of trajectory of the book is the gradual opening up of this character to Appalachian magic and her connection to it. But there's also other plot lines going on around a kind of cult that is also in the region, and some different kind of relationship development going on as well. I really, really enjoyed it. I thought that the nature writing aspects of the book were really, really well done, really beautiful. I thought the character development was really good. I did kind of think that insofar as there was a kind of mystery element to the book, that it was really obvious what was going on. I don't think it was like very suspenseful, but I don't know that being suspenseful was the main point of the book, so maybe that's fine. So that was Wildwood Whispers by Willa Reese. I gave it 4 stars. I enjoyed it. And I read that one with some friends, so that was extra fun, and I'm looking forward to chatting about that one as well. I also read an anthology that I've had sitting on my shelf for a little while. I'd seen it in a bookstore and picked it up, and was looking forward to reading it. That is Sovereign Erotics, a collection of two-spirit literature, edited by Cooley Driscoll, Daniel Heath Justice, Deborah Miranda, and Lisa Tatanetti. And so this is a book that, as it says, a collection of two-spirit literature. A lot of it is poetry. There's also an excerpt from a novel in here. There are a couple of short stories as well. And then there's a very good, very good introduction, kind of situating two-spirit identity and two-spirit literature and this collection in particular. And so one of the things that it explains is that this book kind of emerged alongside another book, a nonfiction collection called Queer Indigenous Studies, and with some editorial team overlap between the two. And I had read quite a bit. I've read quite a bit of Queer Indigenous Studies, the collection, not cover to cover, and I don't own it, but I've read a fair amount of it. But I had never read this one, which is the more the artistic one, whereas the other one is a kind of academic one. And so I saw this in the bookstore, and I thought I'm going to buy it. I don't read a ton of poetry, but I really enjoyed this. I gave this book 5 stars. It's so good. The novel excerpt was really good. I'm planning to pick up the novel that was excerpted in here, and then there was a short story towards the end that it was so good. There are so many authors in here that I want to read more from. There's some authors in here who, in addition to being poets, are also scholars, and I've read some of their more scholarly work before. There are a couple of authors in here that I have read fiction from before in some short story collections, but so good. So if you would like to read a collection of mostly poetry, I would highly recommend this one, Sovereign Erotics, a collection of two-spirit literature. So good. Then the last 3 books I read were for my TBR cards that I drew for this month. And by last 3, I mean the last 3 that I'm going to tell you about, not the last 3 I read chronologically. I read things at the same time as each other and all over the place. So the first card that I'll talk about in the book that I had on my Kindle was to read a book based on a main character in the profession that was your dream job as a child. And so I knew that I wanted to be a veterinarian when I was a child, but I couldn't off the top of my head think of any books that I hadn't read that focused on a veterinarian. So I talked to my mom, kind of hoping she would mention a different profession that I wanted to be, that would be easier for me to find something. And my mom was just like, no, you want to be a veterinarian. That's the only one that I remember that you wanted to be for a long time, was a veterinarian. That's what she said. And I didn't prompt her first to try to get a different answer. That was the one that she remembered too. So to find a book on a veterinarian or main character with a veterinarian, I read a book called The Magic and the Healing by Nick O'Donohoe. And this is a novel about a group of veterinary students who end up traveling to a kind of fantasy world, I guess. Parallel universe is not exactly the right language for it, but a kind of fantasy world. And so they end up serving as veterinarians to griffins and unicorns and all these different kind of fantastical creatures. And then there's a broader plot arc that has to do with this fantasy world being in danger, and the veterinary students and their teacher coming to help with that. I won't give any more away in case this is a book that you're really interested in. It's part of a series. It's the first book in a series. I don't know if I'm going to read the rest. maybe at some point. I enjoyed it. It felt very much like fantasy of a certain decade. Something about it felt extraordinarily 80s to me. I think it was published in the 90s, though. Early 90s. The characters felt a little bit stereotypical in some ways. Not in like an offensive way, but just felt very, this is the jock character, and this is the quiet academic woman character, and very, very kind of like, I don't say one note, something like that. I really like the premise, though. I really like the premise of the alternate world and the fantasy animals, and so I may read the rest of the series just because of that, because I'm hoping that it gets more developed as it goes along. I can't say it was my favorite novel, but I did read it, and it does satisfy this prompt, The Magic and the Healing by Nick O'Donohoe, as a book with veterinarians in it, which was my dream job as a child. The next card that I looked for a book for was horror or paranormal fiction with strong social themes. And here I gave myself a little bit of latitude so that I could read something off of my book pile that I already had, as opposed to looking for something new. And so I read Octavia's Brood, science fiction short stories from social justice movements, edited by Adrienne Marie Brown and Walida Imarisha. I've had this collection for a while. It was put out on AK Press, which is an anarchist publisher that I have a lot of books from. And so the name Octavia's Brood is, of course, a reference to Octavia Butler, who is one of my all-time favorite authors. And the back of the book, I'll just read very briefly, says, "Whenever we envision a world without war, without prisons, without capitalism, we are producing visionary fiction. Organizers and activists envision and try to create such worlds all the time. This book brings together 20 of them in the first anthology of short stories to explore the connections between radical speculative fiction and movements for social change. The visionary tales of Octavia's Brood span genres: sci-fi, fantasy, horror, magical realism," which is how I felt justified in picking it for horror/paranormal with social themes, but are united by an attempt to experiment with the new ways of understanding ourselves, the world around us, and all the selves and worlds that could be. The collection is rounded off with essays by Tananarive Due and Mumia Abu-Jamal, and a foreword by Cherie Renee Thomas. I wanted to love this a lot more than I actually did. I love it conceptually. I love the mission. I love thinking about the politics of science fiction and fantasy, and the fantastical and science fictional in the political. I think that is brilliant, and there were some absolute gems in here, some fantastic stories. I did think that a lot of them were maybe a little bit too short, and that there needed to maybe be a little bit of editing happening. Some of the stories really felt like there was a really solid idea, and maybe a publishing deadline got in the way, or not enough time to flesh it out. So they would kind of set up a world, like a really interesting world with an interesting dilemma, and then it would just kind of end. But there were some really, really fantastic stories in here. And the essay at the end of the book, The Only Lasting Truth by Tananarive Due, that is about Octavia Butler and Due's relationship with Butler and knowing her, was really worth picking up the entire collection for me. I thought it was really, really great. There was an excerpt from LeVar Burton's novel Aftermath in here. There's an excerpt from Terry Bisson's Fire on the Mountain in here, and various short stories. Some of them were really, really fantastic. I just found, and it's not surprising really, to find an anthology uneven. I feel like any anthology of different authors is always something I'm going to find somewhat uneven. And I'll also say, I think a lot of the authors writing in here were writing fiction for the first time. So I applaud that. I think that that's fantastic. And as someone who aspires to maybe trying writing fiction sometime. I'm excited by the opportunity to get to read work by folks who, you know, I share some political commonalities with, who are also exploring the kind of writing of fiction as a way of articulating political ideas. I really, really love that. I didn't love some of the stories at the end of the day, but there were some great ones too. So I'm glad that I read it. Anyway, the last book I'm going to mention was for the freshman card Begin a New series. And I was slightly annoyed. I was slightly annoyed when I got this card because I feel like this is kind of code for read 5 books is one thing. And also quite a few of the books that I'm looking forward to that are releasing in 2022 are sequels. So I'm already in a number of series that are series that I intend to continue that I'm really enjoying. So starting another one, I was a little bit like, I don't know about that. But one of my most anticipated books of the entire year that released this year, not that long ago actually, is going to be part of a duology. 2 books, it's still a series. The duology is still a series. And so I'd intended to read this book anyway and figured, okay, it's beginning a new series. And that book is She Who Became the Sun by Shelley Parker Chan. And this is amazing, this book. It's a novel set in China in the 1340s and 1350s. So it is set in the kind of falling of or latter part of the Yuan Mongol dynasty, and the beginning part of the Ming dynasty is kind of the time period that it is set in. I didn't realize until I started reading it that it is really, really historically based. Almost all of the characters, I think, in this book are based on historical figures. The battles and different occurrences in the book are based on historical events. There is a map in the book, the Great Yuan Dynasty Central Plains region, circa 1355, and this is a real, you know, like these are real cities in a real place, and I think part of the reason that I didn't realize this is because this has been marketed as a fantasy novel, as far as I've seen it. It's been described as a mix between, and I hate when publishers do this, but it's been described as a mix between Song of Achilles, which is a mythological retelling related to the Iliad, and Mulan. But this is historical fiction. The degree to which there are fantasy elements in this book at all, I think, is minimal. Certainly there are aspects of Chinese cosmology at the time, like ancestor veneration and hungry ghosts and the mandate of heaven, and rulers having or not having the mandate of heaven. I'm very hesitant to call those fantasy elements, though, and they're not absolutely central parts of the story either. I would say that this is a historical fiction novel based in the 1340s, 1350s in China. It follows a monk named Zhu Chongba, and Zhu is a character who was assigned female at birth, who takes on her brother's identity after her brother dies. And this is all in the first chapter, so I'm not giving anything away. The brother had received a telling that he would have a life of greatness and a great fate, a great destiny. And when he dies, Zhu takes on that identity to take on that destiny. And in the entire book, Zhu is aggressively pursuing this destined, foretold greatness through being a monk and onwards, through a whole plot that I'm not going to give away. This book is amazing. 5 stars. This is so good. I thought that the character development of both Zhu and the There's a character who's kind of set up as an antagonist to Zhu, but that character also has a very in-depth backstory and treatment such that calling them kind of a bad guy is far oversimplified. I would not say that at all. The character development is amazing. The plot kept me interested. It is mostly kind of power politicking and maneuvering and battles, but it was really, really compelling. And the way that Parker Chan explores gender in this book, I am very appreciative of. So I would highly, highly, highly recommend She Who Became the Sun by Shelley Parker Chan. And I don't know that the sequel even has a title yet. I believe the duology is going to be called the Radiant Emperor duology, I think. And I think that the second book is due out in the summer of next year. I will pick it up and put it on my bookshelf, no question. This was amazing. So good. If you have any interest in historical fiction at all, this is really good. Highly, highly, highly recommend. Those are the books that I read this month, and I'm quite excited about a number of them, so I've talked for a while. So I'm not going to pick any more TBR cards for December because I do have a bit of a book backlog, a bit of an ebook backlog. I do have some advanced reader copies of books coming out next year that I want to get to in a timely fashion. So I'm just going to not constrain myself, challenge myself with any more cards for December. I'm just going to read what I feel like reading for December. Animal of the month, the last thing of the video. The animal that I had chosen for the month was the horse. And this is a horse from the Animal Spirit Oracle by Kim Krans, The Wild Unknown Animal Spirit. I think this is like the second edition, something like that. I'm not sure how much this deck changed between editions. It's the edition before the mass market edition that I stumbled upon in a shop and picked up. I really like this deck. So this beautiful horse. And I ended up having a bit of an unconventional experience learning about a horse. Because I do usually start with looking in the guidebook. And for this one, the guidebook keywords are momentum, freedom, expansive energy, and force. The horse is the most masterful form of earth energy within the deck. There are suits in this deck, and the horse is earth. It provides us with momentum so reliable, so supportive that you can ride on its back towards any goal. And so on and so on. And it talks about the horse's freedom, which I thought was interesting because I didn't even fully realize until I started researching and learning about horses how few wild horses there actually are. So I started reading about horses at different resources that I had found. And so many sources that are like, this is a source about a horse, right? Like so many horse sources are actually about humans. They're actually about how humans treat horses. When horses are first saddled, what different types of horses do different things, like pull plows or race, or like all of these kinds of things that are really about humans, right? And so usually when I'm doing these kind of animal of the month, I'm learning about the animal's behavior and how it lives in the wild and what it does and so on. And for the horse, this was actually really challenging because within the grouping called horse, like within the species called horse, there are, a couple of subspecies. One is the domesticated horse, which is clearly this, the domesticated horse. Then there was the Eurasian wild horse, which is actually extinct. And then there's Zawalski's horse, or he's called Taki, or Przewalski's horse. Zawalski's horse, I hope I'm saying that right. Which is a horse that was a wild horse that was then extinct in the wild, but lived in some like nature preserves and things like that, and has actually been reintroduced into the wild, where it lives traditionally, which is in Mongolia. So there are wild horses in Mongolia, the Zawalski's horse or the Taki, and they've been reintroduced into the wild with much effort, right? After they had been extinct there, but mostly in decks and that it's a domestic horse, which is interesting when I feel like a lot of decks, at least in thinking about it, like the ones that I have, associate the horse with freedom, but then also focus on things like that horses are used for racing. So I've mostly been thinking about horses and freedom and the nature of freedom and what it means to associate freedom with a animal that is mostly not in the wild. There are feral horses which live in the wild. But they are the subspecies. They're domestic horses that have been let out and things like that, right? So really I ended up just thinking a lot about that. And in one of the novels that I was reading, a horse came up. This is not a big plot spoiler or anything. A horse came up and the horse died. Not through like foul play or anything, just the horse died. And there was this whole conversation about why would the individual, who cared for that horse, actually care. You can just have another horse. And then the horse had sentimental value. So every time that horses came up for me this entire month had to do really with what humans think horses are for, which made it a very different month than the other months that I've done an animal card. So what the horse has actually brought up for me, and this is not really about how the horse naturally behaves, because talking about how a horse naturally behaves at this point is actually quite difficult. What has got me thinking about is trying to unthink understanding other species in terms of their instrumental use for people. That is what horses brought up for me, which is not what I expected to have brought up for me. It certainly has shifted, though, how I might feel when a horse comes up in a reading. I think that's really valuable. And I've learned a lot about horses in terms of the different subspecies and the history of their extinctions and reintroductions and things like that. So that's what I've learned about the horse that I thought I would share with you. Not the typical sharing in the animal section, but there it is. For December, I thought I would pick a bird from the Birds Oracle deck. The Birds Oracle deck is by Jessica Blaine Smith and illustrations by Mia Emily Freeman. And it's a 44 card deck. I haven't picked, I've had a couple of birds this year, but I haven't picked any from here, so I thought I would do that. I am going to take the egret out because I had egret from another deck. So the animal for December will be, this deck doesn't have jumping cards too much, but okay, we'll pick this one that's landed on the top. There's the bird for December. And this is a deck that I do have to go to the book, because it's not one that has the name on the card. And the birds are from all over the world, so not all of them are familiar to me. This one for December is the American Kestrel. It is a small, colorful falcon with a rusty body, gray wings, and lots of distinct markings. Lives throughout the Western Hemisphere, often seen on wires, along the sides of roads, eats insects, small vertebrates, rodents, and birds. So I will be learning about and exploring the American kestrel as part of December. And I will share the end of December wrap up what I have learned. The end of December wrap up is probably going to be late. I don't intend to be filming on New Year's Eve. So I will update on American kestrel in the new year and let you know what I've learned. Thank you so much for watching this update. I hope that everyone is well. I wish everyone well going into December. And so I will see you all soon in the next video, which should be coming out soon. Have a good one.